Ollie Barrett reporting there. Right, joining me now to talk more about relations between the US and UK is Marc Ross. He's the founder of Caracal, a communications and political intelligence firm. Welcome back to the show.
How you doing, Rachelle? Good to see you.
So we saw a lot of positive comments and optimism coming out from both Biden and Johnson. But how would you characterize this first meeting?
Yeah, I think it's very important. Obviously, this is his first trip for President Biden, and it's also very intentional that the first meeting he had outside of Washington, D.C. on a foreign trip was with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I think that is very important. As you alluded to, certainly there's been a lot of talk about the special relationship, but more and more this is looking like an essential relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom.
So let's talk about some of the things that went down during this meeting. They agreed to a deal called the Atlantic Charter. What areas of cooperation are covered under that?
Yeah, they're looking at working together on technology, obviously national security, and more business coordination. What's interesting is that this is an 80-year-old document. It was signed actually 2 years before President Biden was born. So it's pretty amazing to see both countries come together and kind of renew this document that has been really the foundation of kind of U.S. foreign policy going back 80 years.
So then talk about the main areas of agreement, from security, NATO, climate change, even to Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I think what's really important, I mean, Joe Biden has been in Washington, D.C. He's been working at the highest levels of government, obviously as a senator, vice president, now president. He's been involved in foreign affairs his entire life. It's really a passion for him. And as you alluded to, his Irish-American ancestry is very interested in, obviously, what's happening with Brexit as it relates to Northern Ireland, and the ability to keep the peace accords going between Northern Ireland and Ireland is very important, not only for President Biden, but also what's happening with the leadership in London.
So then just how significant is this relationship economically and strategically, especially given the toll of the pandemic?
Well, economically, the United Kingdom is actually one of the largest investors in the United States of America. And of course, for a long time, the United States has used financial services in London as a gateway to Europe. So from a business standpoint, it's vitally critical. From a national security standpoint, it's been at the front lines, not only for World War II, but also during the Cold War and working to contain Russia. So the security and the business interests between the United States and the United Kingdom, I can't think of two other nations that the relationship is this critical and this close.
And have you seen this idea of, obviously, with UK now not being part of the EU, do you see that perhaps changing the relationship in any way?
I do and I don't. I mean, I think it's really, obviously the common language, as you know, Americans are very fond of the British. We've got a lot of, historical connections, and obviously the use of language is super important. It does deviate the relationship, how Germany and France, will now see the relationship with the United States. But I can't see any scenario where the United Kingdom does not remain the United States' most important ally in the short term and even the long term.
So then, looking at his predecessor then, how did relations between the US and the UK fare under former President Trump?
Well, I think it was a bit tense. As you recall, President Trump had a very American first policy and had very little use for NATO or Europe at all. Getting back to Joe Biden, I mean, here's a guy who's been in politics for 40 years. Foreign relations has been his forte. It's something he's very passionate about. And it was interesting when President Biden first got to the United Kingdom, he made a speech in front of American troops, and the first thing he said, the United States is back. So much of this trip for Joe Biden is really about saying, America's back, we want to be back on the world stage, we're going to seek multilateral solutions for some of the problems that are facing the planet. So overall, I think in some ways, the foundation has been really laid forward, and meeting with the United Kingdom first has been super important for the president because he's very comfortable in this part of the world, and it just makes an easy transition.
And what about their positions on China? How do you see those either comparing? How different are they?
I think there is, if you look at what's really going to happen over the next 7 days, I mean, all these events that President Biden are really involved in, they can really focus on COVID, climate, and the economy. And certainly the ability for democracies to come together to challenge or kind of influence policy within China as opposed to competition in the global economy. There's a lot of similarities, a lot of agreements. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of separation between the United States and the United Kingdom, even between France and Germany.
So anything that you're keeping an eye on as they head into the G7 summit?
Well, I'm very interested to see, are we going to see more travel as, somebody who works in the global business community, getting on the plane and the ability to travel to London, Paris, or Rome easily. I think it's super important to see some kind of commitment out of that. And I think another thing we should be paying attention to is, will there be a commitment for the Tokyo Olympics? Will you see other nations come behind Prime Minister Suga and say, we are going to be part of the Summer Games in Tokyo? I think that's going to be something to watch as well.
All right, always good to have you on. Marc Ross there, founder of Caracal Communications and Political Intelligence Firm.